Hello everybody, this video is going to be about solving quadratic equations using the square root. Alright, so for number 1, we have x squared minus 4 is equal to 0. So we don't have the middle term. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to isolate the x squared. Eventually we want to get what x is, but we can't get what x is until we get what x squared is. So we go ahead and we add 4 to both sides. When we do that, we get that x squared is equal to 4. So what we just did was we just did an inverse operation. The opposite of subtraction is adding. So we did that to cancel out. Now the operation going on with the x here is squared. We're raising it to the second power. In order to cancel out that power, we have to do the inverse, which is to find the square root. So in order to cancel out a square, you find the square root. Okay, so what happens here is the square root and the square cancel each other out. So you get x is equal to the square root of 4. Now let's just recall what the square root means. The square root of a number means, well in this case, the square root of 4 means what number can I multiply times itself to get 4. So whenever you have a square root of a positive number, you're going to have two answers, okay? So those two answers would be x is equal to 2 and x is equal to negative 2. So you could write it like this, or you could say x is equal to plus or minus 2. They're both the same thing because 2 times itself gives you 4 and negative 2 times itself also gives you 4. So you have two answers. You can write it like this, or you can write it like this. Alright, for number 2, we still want to isolate the x squared, but this time we have a little bit more work to do. So the first thing you want to do is get rid of the other term like we did last time. So add the 18 to both sides. After we do that, we get 2x squared is equal to 18. The next thing to isolate the x squared is to divide by 2. So you get x squared is equal to 9. So now that we have the x squared by itself, we have to get rid of the squared by finding the square root again, the inverse. So again, the square and the square root cancel each other out. So you get x is equal to the square root of 9. And the square root of 9 again has two answers. So x is equal to plus or minus 3. So that's two answers there. Because negative 3 times itself gives you 9 and positive 3 times itself gives you 9. So there's two answers. Alright, for number 3, still the same ball game. We have 1/2 being multiplied times x squared is equal to 8. So we could divide both sides by 1/2, but it looks a little messy when you do that. So the easiest thing to do to cancel out the 1/2 is just to multiply by the denominator. That'll cancel out the fraction. So if I multiply both sides, remember you have to do the same thing to both sides. So if I multiply both sides by 2, the 2's cancel each other out because essentially you're dividing by 2 and multiplying, which will just leave you with the 1. And then here you have 16. So that cancels out the 1/2, so I get x squared is equal to 16. The next step is to find the square root of both sides. And again, my square root and square cancel each other out, which gives me x is equal to the square root of 16. The square root of 16 is not just 4, but it's also minus 4. So plus or minus 4, that would be my answer. Alright. For the next one, it looks a little weird, but it's still the same thing. In order to get the x squared, I have to add 1/4 to both sides. When I do that, I get x squared is equal to 1/4. The last thing to do is to find the square root of both sides. Alright, so with a fraction, if you see that a fraction, you've taken the square root of a fraction, it's the same thing as taking the square root of the numerator and the denominator. So I'm going to rewrite it, and I'm going to simplify my left-hand side too. Remember, those cancel each other out. So you have x is equal to the square root of 1 divided by the square root of 4. It's just a different way to write it. It makes it easy for us to actually find the square root. So the square root of 1 is 1, and the square root of 4 is, well, I should say plus or minus 1 for both of them. It's plus or minus 2. So the simplest way to write this would be x is equal to plus or minus 1/2. And again, if you want to write your solutions as 2 like we did for the first one, saying x is equal to 1/2 and x is equal to negative 1/2, you can write it like that also. So either of these is fine in expressing what your solution is. Thanks for watching.